Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's discussion brought to you by Real Action Community Engagement. In these talks, we like to take questions from the community and ask our guests to speak on some of these. So June is Pride Month, and in recognition of that, today we're going to be talking about Pride and the LGBTQ plus community. Today I have with me Ruby Callen, who I'll let you introduce yourself, but first I want to just say, welcome and thank you for agreeing to talk to us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name's Ruby. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a researcher and an advocate, and I'm currently getting my master's degree in legal studies to hopefully work on policy in the near future.
Very cool, very cool. And I know, we talked a little bit before, and I know that this is kind of a passion of yours, talking about these things and educating people on kind of topics surrounding the gay community, the lesbian community, all these different communities that are kind of lumped into that one big acronym. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, thank you again. And, hopefully people find this useful. Hopefully you guys get some good information out of this. And we'll just go ahead and ask some of your questions now.
Okay.
All right. So before we really get into a lot of kind of more recent topics, can you tell us a little bit about the history of Pride, where it comes from, how did it start, that kind of thing?
Sure. So Pride actually started back in 1969. Well, excuse me. Pride originated from the Stonewall Riots that occurred in 1969. And they were in response to police raiding the Stonewall Inn. And the Stonewall Inn was a gay bar, but it wasn't just for gay folks. It was also where trans individuals who were shut out from their families went there as a safe haven. There was just a lot of community there. And the bar was regularly targeted because of who frequented there. And a lot of the individuals that were targeted by the police were trans and drag queens and everything, because there was a law against masquerading as the opposite gender. So at the time they were fed up with these police raids, this police brutality against them. And so the one night they stood up and they fought back, and they fought back for a few nights to follow. And the next year, 1970, was when the actual first Pride March occurred, and there was a Pride Week, and it was all about advocacy and bringing attention to the issues of the LGBTQ community, that they were being shut out from their resources, they were being brutalized, there was a lot of issues going on. And so from there on, every year they would have sometimes a festival, sometimes a march, protest, that kind of thing, in recognition of the Stonewall Riots in 1969.
Very cool. And this was, that was in New York City, right?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. But then I remember, learning a little bit about it, just that these marches, these festivals, these parades and everything, they started there, and that's where the riot was, but then it moved out to, other big cities, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, places like that. And it's expanded since then, obviously, so that it's now kind of something that every June you can see it very visibly. So it's certainly come a long way.
Yeah, and it caught on really fast. In the year 1970, the first Pride March happened in New York City, and within that year, it was in San Francisco, Chicago, LA, a lot of those cities, and then to follow in the coming years, it was already worldwide. So this was something that was it was held very close to a lot of people, and it was just waiting to catch on, I guess. They were just ready to finally speak up and have a voice.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you mentioned LGBTQ, and there's a lot of letters in that acronym, LGBT, LGBTQ, LGBTQIA plus, adding, there's various representations in that. So could you tell us a little bit more about what some of those represent and what they kind of are initials for.
Sure. So actually, before I dive into what each letter stands for and how the acronym has just had more and more added, I really like to add a precursor for people that aren't a part of the community or aren't as close to the community, so they know you do not have to know all of these off the top of your head. You don't have to remember them. You don't have, as long as you are being respectful to the people around you, because there's a lot of them, and there's a lot of different identities, and there's new ones and there's old ones, and sometimes the words change because language is very fluid.
Right.
So as important as it is to use the correct terminology, the most important part is that you're respectful when someone teaches you what their preferred identity is.
Right.
So
and being responsive that
yes.
When somebody tells you, that's what you try and use from there on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if it's a term you haven't heard before, you can Google it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's how you learn. I mean, and then when it becomes an option to you, if you're comfortable, if you're around someone and you can respectfully and safely, in a safe space, ask them to explain it to you or to elaborate on it and to explain their identity for you, as long as you are respectful and don't go into it with any judgment, because that's not your place. So it's really important to know that there's a lot of things out there, and not everybody knows everything. And you got to just talk to real people sometimes, and sometimes you just got to do a little research.
Right. And having the humility to do that.
Exactly.
And to, come at it from a place of a good place of wanting to understand rather than judgment.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So the one that it's expanded to most recently, at least from my knowledge, I'm not an expert, is the LGBTQIA.
Okay.
So that gets broken down into lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and then there's the plus sign for everything else on the spectrum of gender and on the spectrum of sexuality and how those intermingle and everything like that.
Right.
So again, there's a lot.
Right.
And some people use different terminology to refer to the community. You just have to know your place and like if it's a safe space, if it's not a safe space, you just have to be more cognizant. But those are the most common.
Okay. Yeah. And I think what you said about there being kind of a spectrum or a continuum of kind of sexuality and gender, recognizing that those are two separate things too is a big deal. So yeah, absolutely. And I think, the real thing that is important to highlight from what you just said is that, again, listening to what somebody says and being respectful of what makes them comfortable is really going to be kind of the key there. So if you don't know all the letters, if you don't know all the words or what the most recent or most appropriate term is, having that humility, being responsive, listening instead of just talking. So yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and there are appropriate ways to ask those things. So something that I really suggest making an everyday practice is when you go into it, asking someone for their pronouns, because when you do that, you know how to address them in conversation. And you don't have to go, what's your gender identity and how do you express your gender?
Right.
You just say, what are your pronouns? How would you like me to address you? And then from there on, it's their private life. So unless they share it with you,
right,
it's theirs to tell.
And that's a really good point as well. Thank you for that. Okay. Well, one of the things that I think is big in the representation of this month and in Pride in general is the flag. So where did that come from? You see rainbows everywhere, and I want to ask you a little bit about that here in a second. But where did that flag come from?
So it was back in, I actually wrote the year down, 1978.
Okay.
It was created by a gay man named Gilbert Baker. I believe he lived in San Francisco. He was close to Harvey Milk, which if you don't know who Harvey Milk is, I highly suggest looking into him. He's a fascinating person, and he was one of the first openly gay elected officials.
Oh.
So it comes from a place of advocacy and pride. He actually created it because he saw flags as the most important way to show your pride and show and create visibility for yourself. So if you think about it, every country has a flag, every state has a flag, almost every state. And so that was their way of saying, we're here, this is who we are, and this is how we identify, and we're proud of who we are. And it started out with the 8 colors. And I don't want to mess them up. So it was hot pink for sex, red for life, orange for healing, yellow for sunlight, green for nature, turquoise for art, indigo for harmony, and violet for spirit. So those colors were used to kind of encompass what the LGBT community was trying to harness and just give to the world and show this is who we are and this is what we're proud of. Eventually it went down to 6 colors. I think there's some kind of debate about why they were removed. I think it just really had to do with production. So they took out the hot pink and the turquoise. And so now it's just the Roy G. Biv rainbow that, you know, a lot of us know. And it actually has had a lot of changes over the years. Aside from just that, there have been different variations. So the newest one right now that is really gaining popularity is the Progress flag, and it includes the colors for the transgender flag and colors for people of color. And so it's trying to recognize that the people of color in the community, the intersectionality between being a person of color and being a part of the LGBTQ community comes with its own struggles, and there needs to be recognition for that.
Right, and this is the one that has all the colored lines, but then has the triangle as part of it as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important too, to notice, you know, that there is that intersectionality and the impact that people of color have had in the community. You know, when we talked about Stonewall, you know, one of the leaders of that movement, Marsha P. Johnson, was a Black transgender woman, and you know, that has been there since the onset, and it's not a new addition, even though it might be a new addition to the flag. And you know, I think that's really important for people to understand too.
And it's especially important, like it's been brought up more because there's a lot of they're actually really starting to push for doing the work and advocating for trans women of color, because they're killed at a much higher rate than other women. And like you said, all the way back to the Stonewall Riots, it was trans women of color for the most part that were putting in a lot of this work. Not to say nobody else was there, but for them to be so prominent in the movement and then to not be talked about for all these years. They're really the unsung heroes of the Stonewall Riots.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think that, you know, one of the questions that we received and you know, talking about some of those less visible representations in the community. And, you know, I think one thing that, you know, comes into a lot of people's minds, and, you know, you look at the media and you see, not always, but sometimes you see a lot of stereotypical representation of, you know, even the concept in narratives of bury your gays and stuff like that, where there are all these tropes and pitfalls people fall into that are really not indicative of people in the community. And so, yeah, to hear you say that this is an integral part of the community that has been overlooked. And I think, you know, even understanding that as a member of the community, but as somebody who very visibly has that privilege, and you know, I do not have to live with that, the bias against me and the intersectionality of being both somebody in the community and being a person of color. And I think that's something that we need to recognize too, is that it is also our responsibility to make sure that those people that are unsung are represented as well.
Right. And there has been a lot of progress but we can always go much further.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the notion of things like the flag, while they are, they are a symbol, they're not an actual like necessarily change, I want to say, but it's a start. And the idea of like, hey, let's increase this visibility, let's explain what it means. And I think that that's nice to see in that spirit of progress, I guess.
Yeah. And like with now Pride Month has become much more popular. And so you see it a lot in different marketing campaigns, and just a lot of different organizations are starting to, throw rainbows into their marketing
Sure.
for the month of June. And that's great for visibility, but that only goes so far. And it actually has been coined rainbow washing or pink washing.
Okay.
Because what you're doing is washing out all the issues and just putting a rainbow on it and saying, here, we're putting in our efforts. But that's not all you can do. There's so many other ways to support the community aside from just showing a rainbow.
Right.
And I mean, the rainbow isn't even the only flag that's integral to the community. Every person, almost everybody in the community has their own flag. Even allies have their own flag. It's not necessary that everybody flies it, and your identity might change and everything's fluid. So, but there's so much more representation out there than is given credit. And so when these large companies and businesses and stuff just start throwing pride flags up, it tends to feel like they're just capitalizing off of a movement instead of actually contributing to the movement. And that's not everyone. That's just an issue that as pride becomes more popular, I think it's really important for people to be cognizant of that and really look into, am I actually supporting the queer community, or am I just buying something with a rainbow on it?
Right. So it's not just that surface level, there's content and substance behind it.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that's something, we've seen a lot of that in like the news recently and, in social media, the criticisms of certain organizations or companies or individuals that are essentially doing exactly that. So can you talk a little bit about, just to your comfort level, like what ways can people be more supportive of the actual community, not just rainbow washing?
Right. One of the easiest ways to start is just with the people closest to you. Introduce yourself with pronouns, or if you're not comfortable adding that into your introduction, asking someone what their pronouns are when you start a conversation. I mean, it's even better if you do both, and you don't have to do it every single time. You don't have to do it around every single person you know. Start with people you're comfortable with. Start a dialogue about it. That's what's really important, is to just have this conversation, and especially to have the tough conversations whenever you feel comfortable enough to get to those. People in the community need as many allies as possible, and one of the best ways to be an ally is to call in the people around you. And I like to say call in instead of call out. I actually read it in this really amazing book that I won't get into, but the idea is that you call in individuals so that you aren't making them feel shame. You have a one-on-one conversation and discuss what's going on. So you're calling them out on what they said, but you're doing it in a more intimate way to say, hey, this is where the issue lies, and ask them if they don't understand. Is there something about this that is too difficult for you, or are you just not understanding why people do this? It's outside of your comfort zone. And just have those conversations that are uncomfortable. And it's not fun, but it's so helpful, because if you as an ally have that really uncomfortable conversation with them, they don't have to have that conversation with a queer person who is already worried about their safety. So those are the most important things, I think, to start out, is just interpersonal interactions and just trying to educate yourself and educate those around you as much as you can. And then in other ways, I mean, it's so great to help out financially if you can. I know this isn't something that everyone can do. Supporting local LGBTQ businesses is really awesome. but also supporting nonprofit organizations that support the community. And this is where my advocacy really comes in. So there's different groups. Sometimes there's an LGBTQ center in your community. If you don't have one and you don't have any LGBTQ specific resources, just supporting homeless shelters, food banks, clothing drives, all that kind of stuff. A lot of individuals that are LGBTQ go through food insecurity. They may lose housing. If someone's transitioning and they can't afford to buy the clothes that really represent their gender identity, that's a really difficult thing. And then it's even harder to get jobs. And all of these things are systemic. So if you're even just supporting local nonprofits, in the long term, you're supporting the LGBTQ community too. It doesn't have to be just specifically LGBTQ resources if you would like to donate to bigger things. But the only caveat that I have with that is really try to look into the organizations and make sure that they're not anti-LGBTQ, because sometimes there are communities or there are organizations that are just really great for the community and they're really doing their best, but they have some practices that are exclusionary. And if you want to support the LGBTQ community, that's not how you do it.
Right. So doing some due diligence.
Right. Yeah.
Looking into it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, the last thing I was going to say is if somebody comes to you about it, I really like to have this discussion with people who are just kind of like, I just get really uncomfortable and I don't really know what to say. You don't have to say anything. When someone comes to you and they want to come out, or if they're struggling with anything, just listen and do your best to support them. And sometimes it may be someone that you aren't expecting, or maybe someone's coming to you where they're not that close to you, but they don't have the support that, you may have. They may not have family members or friends they can turn to for their safety or for their comfort. And you may be the person that they reach out to because they see you as a colleague or someone that, coming out to you wouldn't be a detriment to their social structure.
There's some sort of safety there.
Right. Yeah. So if people come to you about those things, and if it comes to the point where you're like, I'm not the person to talk to about this, be open. Say, I want to support you, but I don't have the knowledge. I don't want to do anything that will just cause harm. It's really just about being open and honest and supportive during this time, because it's really difficult. And if someone's turning to you, that means that they trust you in some way.
Right. And saying, something to the effect of what you just mentioned, I might not be the person to talk to because I don't know enough is very different than saying, don't talk to me because I can't deal with this.
Right.
Yeah. So, to kind of try and summarize a lot of what you're saying, do the due diligence, educate yourself, look into these organizations that you might want to contribute to. But then also that openness to being available for people that are having a difficult situation, and your job in that is really to listen. And I think that that could probably be said for a lot of things, not just when talking about people coming out, but if we could listen more than we talk sometimes, as I go on and on and on. But the idea of being there for what the other person needs and being, I've said it many times now, being responsive to what they need in that moment.
Right.
That's a big deal there. So thank you. So in that vein, kind of talking about advocacy, talking about what even small actions people can take, what is something that you, just in brief, what is something you wish people knew more about as far as the community and Pride and stuff like that?
This is actually something that I've been a lot more vocal about since I have started participating in Pride more, is it's not just a party. I didn't realize how many people thought that Pride is just like, we're going to the bars, we're just dressing fun, we get to wear rainbows. Like, that is a huge part of it. a lot of us get to have just a really good time in a safe space and just let loose. But it's also a very intense time for a lot of people. There's a lot of fear and heartbreak and solitude and injustice that, you know, comes with being a part of this community. And like I said before, we've made a ton of progress. And when you're in places like I am in Akron, like it's much more accepting here. But if you look at other places where pride isn't celebrated, or it's not even a topic of conversation, that's where pride is needed the most. People need to see that it's not just a big party. It's really to show the amount of work that has been put into advocating for these people, and that we're all people and we have full lives, and we've been through experiences that may have been really difficult while also having experiences that are really great. And that is really what encompasses pride, is that it's everything from a party to a memorial to a protest. And throughout the entire day when you're at Pride, there's a number of resources. You can find places to help you with housing or job searching, but you can also just make friends and enjoy a concert. Like, it is just so amazing to me what Pride has come to represent, from where it started. And one of the biggest things that I think is absolutely amazing is that now it's becoming more accessible to even younger people, and people can take their families. And this is why I say it's not just a huge party with drinking. Like, you can bring kids,
Right.
like, it's fun. And making this visible to younger kids, even if they're in like high school or middle school or whatever, them being able to see that, like, oh, this is a celebration about me, or, you know, what I'm trying to figure out with myself. And they can see people embracing it and all of the happiness that comes with it, even if it is hard sometimes.
And even for
Making
those
that
people
visible
that
to,
aren't, yeah, even those people that
right,
aren't part of the community themselves, it helps to build that allyship in them.
right, yeah. And it's very welcoming as long as it remains a safe space. And
Right.
that's really the most important part. But it really is just so much more than that. And, you know, not even just June, year round, the community
Right.
can be so much fun, but there's also a lot of work that goes into maintaining it and getting the progress that we've had.
Right. Yeah. The people in the community don't go away July 1st.
Yeah,
You know,
right,
people are there. We're
exactly.
not just tropes. We're not just stereotypes, and we're not here just for 1 month of the year.
Yep, right.
You know, we live, and we live our normal lives, and we live, you know, we go to the parties, and we represent, and we try and do what we can to be advocates, but not everybody is comfortable with that. But that doesn't mean
Right.
that they're any less a part of what pride represents.
Hmm.
And I think that that is really important too, in the spirit of what you taught me today, of the calling in rather than
Right.
calling out. So I think that the notion of pride is not to be exclusionary in any way, um, but quite to the contrary, it's to include
Right.
everyone that needs that support and needs that, um, just to know that they're not alone.
Right.
And that can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And
Yeah.
I agree with you 100%. I think it's very nice to see a lot of that represented,
Hmm.
not just in events, but in the community itself.
Right.
Um, well, thank you. I'm getting a little emotional here talking about this.
My
I
first Pride, I
appreciate that.
was so emotional. My first Pride parade, oh my goodness. It really is, it's such a fun day, and it's so emotional, and it's just, there's so much to it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, so let me ask you this, just shifting gears a little bit, just trying to close out here too. What is something that you would like to say to somebody who might be watching this that struggles with these concepts, that is unsure about how they feel about the community or pride or the things that it represents?
Yeah. So I'm going to come at this from the researcher side of things,
Okay.
where my heart lies. um, there's a lot of really great information out there that can really help to learn and to bring these conversations out with different people, not just with, you know, who's in your bubble or who's in your circle. There's a lot of them are free. So if you go to the Human Rights Campaign, the Trevor Project, the Safe Zone Project, there's multiple sources online where they offer all of their information for free, at least almost all of it. And there's some trainings, there's some safe space trainings, so you can figure out how to, in your work every day, how to talk to different people while being inclusive. And there's also research out there. If you're someone like me that's very like analytical, has to know the science behind it, if you've always questioned this because it's not in your understanding of science, the research is out there. You just have to know how to look for it. And I definitely suggest going to things like the Human Rights Campaign or GLAAD or the Trevor Project, things like that, because they are accredited. Even the CDC has some resources. These are all places where you can find information that has been validated and it's not just opinion-based. So I think, in my opinion, that's the most important place to start, to make sure that the information you're getting is accurate, and then being able to figure out how to bring this out into, you know, your friend group, your circle, to have real life conversations with people and learn from each other and have a dialogue.
And I like that word, the dialogue, because feeling comfortable being uncomfortable.
Right.
You know, that's something that I like to you know, live by, is you're not going to learn, you're not going to be open to other experiences until you can at least moderately push yourself out of that comfort zone and just ask the question. And if you are coming from a place of wanting to understand, I don't think anyone would ever begrudge that question.
Right.
So yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, you know, we always like to finish these sessions by asking, what is one thing that you would like everyone to take away from this session today?
So much.
Can only pick one.
My biggest thing that I really, really, really would love for people to look into, try to have more conversations about, is supporting LGBTQ youth. So, especially trans youth. So I don't have kids of my own, so I can only speak from a perspective of just knowing young people, but youth are so much more vulnerable to a number of things. And if you are able to intervene before things get too serious, such as if they have severe anxiety and depression or suicidal ideation, there are statistics out there that LGBTQ youth, especially trans youth, have much higher rates of suicide attempts than their heterosexual counterparts. Right. And that's actually something that the Trevor Project has become a nationwide renowned organization in support of young LGBTQ people. And it's so important to reach them because they're so vulnerable. And when they aren't in a space where they're supported and they're loved and they're ensured that they can be who they are, it can have very dangerous repercussions, especially with what's going on in the country with legislation and just different things coming out against LGBTQ youth and their treatment and their doctor's visits. Everything has become so volatile. Whether or not you agree with the legislation, it's important to think about those kids as kids, and they need intervention in some way. And if you can be that one person in their life that says, I accept you as you are, let's talk about this, because that's what they need.
And thank you very much for sharing that. That's, I agree. I think that is something that we definitely need more of. So thank you.
Of course.
I'd like to thank my guest, Ruby, today for being here and for taking the time to talk to us tonight. On behalf of Real Action Community Engagement, I'd like to thank everyone for taking time out of your day to actually listen to this discussion. Hopefully something in here was helpful to you and it answered some of the questions that you might have. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a good night and happy Pride.
Thank you. Happy Pride.